All we can experience are different accounts of the past. We can experience different constructions of the past. We cannot experience the past itself. It's gone. It's lost to us forever. That means the historical Jesus, as Jesus actually existed in history, is inaccessible to you. You will not find him. You cannot find him. You will never find him. What you can do is, using the trades, the tricks of the trade of modern historiography, you can play by the rules of modern historiography, and you can construct a historical Jesus. That means a Jesus of Nazareth constructed using the same kinds of historical tools as historians would use to construct the historical George Washington, the historical Socrates, the historical Plato, the historical Abraham Lincoln. That's a construction, though. So those theoretical points are very important, because when I talk about the historical Jesus, you cannot think, like most popular people think, that what I'm talking about is the real Jesus, the Jesus as he really was, or certainly not the Jesus of Christian faith. What I'm giving you is an account of Jesus that modern historians construct using the typical tools of modern historiography. So here are some things that I think we can agree about, most historians might agree about. First, the sign on the cross. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Anybody else? One verse says, "This is Jesus of Nazareth." And it's because the 4 different Gospels have slightly different wording. But they all have something version of Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, which is, of course, why you sometimes see this abbreviated from the Latin. Jesus of Nazareth, in Latin, Rex, King Iudeorum, of the Jews. So that, notice how, though, it's slightly different. Let's look, if you've got your Bibles, it's Mark 15:26. It's also Matthew 27:37. It's also Luke 23:38. And it's also John 19:19. Now in Mark 15:26, it says, "The inscription of the charge against him read, 'The King of the Jews.'" That's it. Then it goes on about this stuff. Look over right next to it on Matthew. It says, over his head they put the charge against him and said, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." So it's slightly different. Luke 23, there was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." Put their finger on John 19:19. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And doesn't it say in John that it was in different languages? Or am I forgetting it? That's right, Hebrew, Latin, and Greek in the Gospel of John. So that's what we've got. One of the things that most scholars will say is, we think that's historical. And why do we think it's historical? Well, for one thing, it comes from at least 2 independent sources, right? What are the 2 independent sources that it comes from? It's in all 4 Gospels, but all 4 Gospels aren't independent sources, are they? Why? Because we believe that Matthew and Luke used Mark. So if Matthew and Luke copied it from Mark, that makes Mark one source. Did the author of John use the Gospel of Mark? Not according to the theory we're using in this class. Some people might say yes, some scholars might say yes, but in this class we're going on the theory that the Gospel of John probably didn't use Mark as one of his sources. So you've got the Gospel of John as one source for this. You've got the Gospel of Mark as another source for this. So you have 2 of what scholars are willing to treat as independent sources, which both have this nice little piece of data, this datum right there. Now the other thing is that, it might be interesting for you to know, King of the Jews is not a Christological title that early Christians used about Jesus. Remember in the Gospels we've seen a lot of different titles for Jesus. He's the teacher, he's the Son of God, he's the Messiah, he's the Holy One of Israel, we just saw. He has a lot of things, and these things are obviously things, early Christians called him Lord, they called him Son of God, but they didn't call him King of the Jews. It was one of the titles of Jesus that apparently the earliest followers of Jesus didn't latch onto. So we don't see it in the letters of Paul, and we don't see it elsewhere in the Gospels. So what scholars have said is, look, this thing, King of the Jews, doesn't look like a Christological confessional title that Christians made up and then put into the Gospel. It goes against the tendency of the Christian writers themselves, because it's not one of their titles. If it had said, this is Jesus of Nazareth, the Lord of heaven and earth, then scholars would say, well, that sounds like a Christian confession. But saying Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, doesn't sound like a Christian confession. So it goes against the tendency of the writers themselves, and we say, well, maybe then it's historical. Maybe it's a little glimpse of history sitting in there. In other words, the question was, didn't this come from the mocking terms in the trial? That's exactly right. The Christians, if you notice, it's the people who are mocking Jesus who call him King of the Jews. And so why, this is not something that the Christian writers want to invent and then put in the story.